Welcome back to another video, and today I'll be showing my top 3 eyeshadow palettes in each category. Welcome back, and today we're doing something fun. So I got this video idea from Rachel Palmier. I'll be listing her original video on the description box, so I would highly recommend watching hers. But because I do love talking about my eyeshadow palettes, I thought this would be fun, and I was actually saving this video sort of concept for a time when I don't have that much other things to film, so this actually fit in perfectly now with my filming schedule. So the video title is top 3 eyeshadow palettes in every category. I will be putting the sort of like how Rachel had put like her categories. I actually did end up combining one category. I'll be talking about it once we get to it, but I did edit this video concept a little bit, and if you are someone who wants to do this on your own YouTube channel, I do think that you can of course like edit and change the categories a little bit according to your preferences. But this is going to be very sort of interesting, it was kind of when, I think I said it on my sort of Easter eyeshadow palette favorite video last week, that I have never done a top 10 eyeshadow palette like all together from my whole eyeshadow palette collection, a top 10 video, and I think this video just showed why for me it would be very like hard, because with some of these categories I did have like quite clear that I knew that what are my top 3, but then on some others it was very difficult to pick and choose which I would include. But this is based on sort of my current preferences. If I would do this another year or maybe like a week later, some of these palettes could change, so take this as a something fun and not maybe something that's serious. But let's now get to each categories and what palettes that I choose for them. So let's start with the first category, which were the sort of top 3 neutral palettes, and surprisingly all of these actually are indie eyeshadow palettes, even though with neutral palettes we will see later that, for example, in some other categories we actually do have quite many neutral palettes. But this also kind of maybe shows that indie eyeshadows generally have gone quite far, because indie eyeshadow palettes first became quite popular for the fact that they did these colorful shades and special shades very well, and that is still something that I do think that indie palettes succeed in. But I think this also shows that indie palettes these days, they do also cater for neutral lovers. Some of these might be a bit stretch if you really think that neutrals are like these very brown and grayish, like very basic tones. For me, a good neutral palette is something that there's definitely a twist to it, that there's something that makes it a bit special than the average brown palette that we will see. So I think the third one is actually a relatively new one, and I think so far this has been the most wowing palette that I tried doing this year. So on the place number 3 in terms of my top 3 neutral palettes is this one. So this is the Cosmic Beauty Neutrals palettes, and I did get this as a Christmas present, but I didn't get to review this until January. So this I think is definitely one of those neutral palettes that, yes, you get your very basic browns in this one, but you also do have quite a lot of like twist to this. There's some like mustard yellows, we have some earthy greens, and the special shades in this one are very beautiful. They go very well together with the mattes that have been chosen for this one, and I think this is one of the few palettes that I could just go on and on creating different kind of looks, and it's a very like, it's probably a palette that I will be putting back into my rotation at some point, because I do think that it's just something that inspires me quite endlessly. This is a very warm leaning neutral palette. I think the couple of other ones that you'll be seeing later, they have a bit more like, I would say, cool tone options to them. But I do think that especially if you're a warm neutral eyeshadow palette lover and you love your indie palettes, if I would get this one. I do think that, is this currently in stock? I do think at the Monolith Shop's website this is, but with Cosmic Beauty's own website this might be something that you might have to check this out, because with indie brands the downside of them is that because they're smaller brands they can't keep things in stock like all the time. But if you are still able to get this somewhere, I would like to recommend it, a beautiful neutral palette. So next, a bit of a brand that has been in a bit of a sort of break from I think a lot of YouTubers. I think Jen Loves did a good video of why people have been some people, not all creators, but some have been now like not talking about this brand, so I would recommend watching Jen Love's video about it. But because I got this palette like way long ago, I am going to feature it. And my second sort of like favorite like top 2 neutral would be this one. So this is the Enslayer Rain Cold Moon palette. For some this might definitely be a stretch, that can you categorize this as a neutral palette, but I already discussed that for me a good neutral palette has a twist, and this is definitely a more cool toned leaning option for neutral palettes. You have your grays, you have your moreish tones, but this does have a bit of like green and blue twist to them. And what definitely makes this a very special palette are the shimmers and also Ensley Rain's matte formula. It is very easy to blend, very easy to work with, and generally the looks that I create with this one always come out very beautiful. And again, just like with the Cosmic Beauty palette, this is something that I am always very like eager to reach for when I have time between reviewing newer palettes. But a beautiful palette and a good cool tone option. Very expensive though, and I've always said that I'm not a person who has altogether collected a lot of Ensley Rain palettes, because with these ones already, because of the price, I would get only the ones that you actually like in terms of color stories, because it's not, I don't think all of these are worth the very high price tag that the brand carries. Then the number one palette. I think I chose this purely because this I think is one of the most used one of all of these. So this is the Blend Bunny Dollhouse palette, especially the matte quality, beautiful. Again, if you categorize your neutrals as just basic browns, this might not be for everyone, but for me this is definitely a plenty enough for being on a neutral category. The shimmers aren't definitely as popping as the Ensley Rain or the Cosmic Brushes formulas are, but I can overlook that one because the way that these tones work, the lighter, almost like pastel tones in this one, they show up on your lids with just a couple of like, you only need basically one swipe. But the deeper shades, even though they look that maybe for a fair skin tone they might be tricky to work with, they work out effortlessly. And again, because this has maybe a bit more sort of grungy or colorful shades, they do actually give this a sort of a nice twist. So you can do the basic brown looks, but you can actually do also maybe a bit more fun looks. I'm not so sure is this something that is still on available on Blend Bunny's website. I do think that at least on Monolith Shop, which is the European retailer for the sort of popular overseas indie brands, I think on their website this has been like out of stock for some time now. But if you for some reason would be able to get this one still, I would recommend getting it, or if you have it then definitely use it, because I do think that for me this, just the quality of the formula and what kind of looks I get with this one, this is all something that I can always like take from my drawers and I know the look will come out great. Then let's get to the category that I combined. So in the original video, I think Rachel had that she had colorful and monochromatic palettes as a separate category, but because I have definitely maybe moved away from, I certainly had my phase when I, for example, had all the color pops like monochromatic 9 pans, but I definitely think that for me, I've moved away from having monochromatic palettes. I do have a couple and one of them is included, but I combined the colorful monochromatic ones because for me, I was thinking that I don't have like enough favorites, especially with the monochromatic ones, to combine them in. So we're combining two categories. And so the third one, and this is actually the only monochromatic one, is this one. So this is the Berries palette by Beauty Bay. This is the huge 42 pan version. You can get a 16 pan variation of this one, so you don't have to get this one. And for me, why this is in the video, because this is sort of my ultimate favorite pink eyeshadow palettes. I'm a huge fan of pink eyeshadow. I know that not everyone especially likes these bright pinks, but for me there is something very comforting about this color story. This actually does have a sort of more purpley row. The 16 pan variation only is very like sort of pink leaning, but the bigger one has actually, you do get a bit of purple, so it does bring some diversity for this one. Do you really need this many pink eyeshadows? No, but I think for me this is like all in one, like sort of all my favorite pink colors in one. Something definitely that maybe because this is a drugstore palette is that the shimmers again aren't anything wowing, and this has a couple of shimmer formulas. There's a more satin version and then you have a more sort of what I would call a brighter shimmery version, but for me this is still a palette that I do use, especially when I'm in a mood for more of a pink eyeshadow looks. And even though the shimmers might not be anything revolutionary, they still do work quite beautifully, and I do think especially for Drugstore, Beauty Bay is definitely one of those brands that I would recommend getting if you're looking for generally for good colorful palettes at a drugstore price, because they certainly have these like in all the colors of the rainbow. Then I think two of the next ones are something that if you watched my Easter eyeshadow palette favorites video, these are quite familiar. So then from maybe on the rainbow palette sides, Cosmic Brushes Delicious Delights, I already discussed earlier that the Lovers palette that the Cosmic Brushes released recently. Unfortunately, with that one I had some issues. This one, still one of the best sort of colorful rainbow palettes that I have in my collection in terms of quality, and Cosmic Brushes has been known, they actually became popular from doing these like very colorful shades that usually can be a bit harder to formulate, but they were able to do it at a pretty decent price point. I don't know is this available anymore, but I think that for a colorful, if you're looking for like colorful mattes that are easy to work with, that you get a lot of pigment, this is definitely a palette to get. And the shimmers formulas in this one aren't maybe the most shiftiest or special kind of shimmers, and this has actually less shimmers than mattes, but still a very beautiful palette altogether, and one of my sort of like go-to rainbow palettes. And then something that I did discuss this is perhaps maybe actually one of my favorite like all-time colorful palettes. So we have another Blend Bunny palette, and this is the Sickly Sweet one. And what has especially made this special is that this has the kinda, because I have had my fair share of pastel palettes, and the Cosmic, aside from this one and the Cosmic Beauty palette, there are a couple of more pastel palettes I do own, but what makes this as exceptional is that they were able to formulate these sort of pastel neons that are usually quite hard to formulate in a very good formula where they pack a punch, they show up. Shimmers of this one, not one of my like all-time favorites, but I'm very willing to overlook them because as a colorful palette, this pretty much has everything that I want. It also has deepening up shades. I am able to use this as a standalone palette versus maybe some of the other pastel tone palettes that I have that don't have the sort of depth. But unfortunately, again, this was a limited edition palette, but for me, I'm very happy that I got this one because this definitely, I think, just exceeds quite a lot of other colorful shades and formulas that I have tried from other brands. Next one was some mini palettes, and I actually, when I started looking at my drawers, I was first thinking that I don't have that many mini palettes, and then I actually realized that, okay, yeah, actually I have quite decent amount, for example, luxury palettes that can be authorized for this one, and with this one we had one Drugstore and 2 of them are high-end one. So maybe on the place 3 from mini palettes is this one. So this is the MUA Makeup Academy 5-pan eyeshadow palettes in the shade Desert Bloom variation. So they do actually have several one of these. There is some variation in between formulas of these ones, so with these ones you really have to like sort of maybe see which one you get, because not all of these seem to have a equally good formula, but this was actually one of the like relatively high ranking smaller palettes in my sort of overall eyeshadow palette ranking that I did last year. And I did, even though this doesn't give you a lot of variety, I do think for Drugstore the formula is just exceeds quite a lot of like Drugstore, even some high-end formulas, and the shimmers are very buttery, and this is one of those like very effortless, easy on-the-go palettes. And for the I think for the formula quality, it was the main reason I included as one of the sort of top smaller palettes. Then I think a very sort of YouTube favorite, so the Dior Backstage Silver Essentials. This was unfortunately a limited edition palette. I think for me this is still the best quality that Dior has put into the sort of 9 pans. Obviously this is a very cool toned eyeshadow palette, and I know this might not be for everyone's cup of tea, but I do think just how buttery and easy this formula is to work with, but still the pigmentation, because not all of these sort of especially traditional luxury and high-end brand formulas are especially pigmented, because usually the consumers that kind of wear this, they maybe want something more buildable. But what impressed me was the smoothness of the formula, but then again the fact that you did get quite a lot of punch when you actually use this. And again, this I think is also one of the standout, because some of these Backstage color stories have been pretty repetitive, but this also I think stood out in terms of color story that the brand has done these in. And then the number 1 for me, this was actually favorite from last year, so this is the Spice palette from ABH, and this is how the palette is looking. I think these mini 9 pans actually ranked relatively high from in a lot of people's end of the year rankings last year, and I'm very bummed because I did discuss this. If you go and watch my previous makeup news video, ABH is going to be coming out with another one of these 9 pans, and I do actually like that she is coming out with these 9 pans, but it seems that the formula isn't going to be the one that was in the Spice palette and the Sugar palette, which was the second palette that was launched with this one. But I am happy I got this one, because this truly, the mattes are buttery, pigmented, very easy to use, and then the shimmers are very beautiful. They do have a bit of a shift to them when you get them surely, so they actually do bring something special to your looks. But yeah, this I think is still available at least in our ABH retailers, so I would actually like, if you've been looking for a good, especially a bit more warmer leaning 9 pan, then maybe go and get this one, because I do think the quality of this is pretty awesome. So let's get to the drugstore ones, and with this one there is actually a one K-beauty palette that you could maybe debate, because the palette is closer to, depending where you get it from, 20 to 30 euros, so it is kind of up there, but I do usually put the K-beauty palettes with my drugstore palettes, because they are kind of close to the drugstore range. So on number 3 there is actually a relatively new one. I'm just trying to read this. So this was the 07 Berry Fuchsia Garden. This actually, I have reviewed this quite recently. And I was already quite impressed with the Pampas Garden, which was the palette from the series that I tried during last year. And I do think actually I like this even more, because I do think that the Pampas Garden, because it was so heavily peachy leaning, the looks you kind of ended up getting with were pretty similar, but this actually you do get a bit of variation with your looks, because this does have shades that do end up giving you depth, and we do have a bit of variation with pinks and lilacs. And even though the sort of adhesive shimmer isn't my favorite, I do still think that this is like one of the like nicer K-beauty formulas, and the looks that I did end up getting with this one were pretty like impactful. And this, for example, these mattes, they definitely do like pack a punch. So if you've been eyeing this better than palettes from like Romand, I would definitely like try this one, because at least I do think this is pretty awesome. Then a sort of palette that I did rank as one of my sort of highest drugstore palettes in my 2023 ranking. So this is the MUA Blush Nude palette, and this, I'm gonna actually show this close by because it is a bit on the smaller side. Sorry, yeah, I just hit my arm to the bed, to the table side. That hurt a little bit. Okay, let's get back to the, sorry about this one. So this has again a very close to the formula with the Desert Bloom palette. I have tried one of these, like a few of these big palettes, because they have come out with also new ones and some that were already exist in line, and this again seems to be a palette range where the formula changes a little bit, so depending what palette you get, so you really have to be quite picky which one you get. But I think this one has again a very superior drugstore formula. The packaging is very cheap, and the formula inside, the mattes are very smooth, very easy to build, blend in nicely together, and the shimmers in this one give the kind of very nice wet look on your eyelids. So if you are able to get this on your drugstore, I would like certainly recommend getting this one. But as I said, I wouldn't recommend maybe all of this, because I did try, for example, during, was it last year or at the beginning of this year, there was the, I think it was the Starlight palette, which is very similar. It had a more pinkier color story, and with that one, wasn't a fan of the formulas. I don't know what they did with the shimmers, but this one, the Blush Nudes, this is something that I would recommend, definitely one of my sort of old to-go drugstore palettes. And then a drugstore palette that I think was actually one of the most highest ranking drugstore palette from my ranking last year. So this is the Makeup Revolution, one of the Icon palettes, and this is in the True Icon variation. These are also not built equal, but I do think that this is the like what I would call the best formula that I think I have so far gotten in terms of eyeshadow from Makeup Revolution. We all know that Makeup Revolution has been very hit and miss brand in terms of the eyeshadow formulations. I do hope that they would include this in like the formula that they especially used in this one now in their future, at least with the Icon palettes, because I do know that they have, for example, the Holiday Collection palette was in the same format, and they have come out with a colorful one now during this year, so I am hoping that they are now sticking with this formula, because this is a very beautiful formula. The cream shades are the only shades that I'm not a fan of. They are very emollient cream shades that I think only cause the shadows to crease rather than adding something to this one, but the shimmers and mattes beautiful, and this very, like when I'm wearing this, I don't think you would be able to tell am I wearing a drugstore or a high-end eyeshadow. So if you've been eyeing this one on a drugstore, definitely go and get it. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. And then the last of the categories, so high-end ones, and first one is a very sort of an OG palette that is no longer available. This was also, I think, the most expensive one of the bunch. And this has the one very reflective, so this is the by Radar Remembrance. I'm gonna open this one because this is very shiny. So in terms of shimmers, you're not gonna get anything special with this one, but this is for especially those of you who want something very easy. You maybe have texture on your eyelids, meaning that, for example, these very chunky indie shimmers, they don't flatter you, or you just want something very office appropriate, or something that if there is some kind of if there is some kind of other event where you're looking something just very easy and effortless, this will do the work for you. I appreciate this because this also, you kind of have a bit of cool tones mixed with warm tones in this one, and you do have a good gradient from light to deep shades. This is a very unique formula, I think, altogether when I'm trying to, because I don't think that even with some of the luxury and other high-end brands, I don't have a formula like this one. This formula, even though it initially when you apply it is a bit sheer, but actually this is a formula that does with the mattes build up quite quickly when you actually start laying the shades. And the only, I think, dud shade that this has is this this dark brown over here. This is very patchy. I have tried to use this with brush and with fingers, I can't get it to work, but other than that, this is a very it's a very beautiful and effortless formula. Unfortunately, by Radar does these big palettes. I haven't seen that they have yet actually released, because they usually do this once a year during the sort of springtime, and I haven't yet seen that they have been teasing this year that they be launching with this one, but I would hope so, because I do think it's a great eyeshadow palette formula. These are very expensive. I paid over, I think I paid 90 euros for this one. So you do have to take into consideration that if you want something, for example, very popping and pigmented on the go, then this isn't the formula for you. But if you enjoy especially your luxury formulas, this is a great brand to go to. Especially, I wouldn't maybe get the smaller ones. I still think the Quints that by Radar does, those are a bit overpriced, but these big palettes, when they do launch them, I would definitely look into them. Then a sort of, how should I say, a palette that I think everyone's favorite palette the year it launched. So this is the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. I'm gonna still hold my ground, and with the fact that I do think with the mattes, I do feel occasionally that I run out of matte options, meaning that I don't feel that I get as many maybe looks with this one as the palette could have potential to, but I'm very willing to overlook the lack of matte diversity with this one, because otherwise this is, I think, because I have the I Need a Warm that I do think had a formula close to this, and now I do have the Bloom palette, but this, especially the shimmers in this one, she really did something very exceptional with the shimmers, and I would really hope that instead of going maybe back to the old shimmer formula that Natasha Denona used to have, that she would just stick with the formula that was in this one, because this is truly a very beautiful palette. I can understand why this has been popular, and especially if you like a very lot of sort of neutral or even cool toned sort of eyeshadow palettes, this is, I think, a very sort of easy and approachable palette. And as I said, I do think in terms of quality, this is especially with the shimmers, the best quality that ND has done, and I would really hope that she would just stick with these ones and wouldn't keep changing up, because ND has really been having the habit now. For example, I do know that the Roxa palette, it did get a bit of critique from some YouTubers that again had a bit of different formula again. Then the Bloom palette, again, it seems that there's some different formulas in this one, so I would hope Natasha Denona would stop experimenting with her formulas and keep with the formulas that people give positive feedback for the brand too. And then from the high-end palettes, my sort of all-time favorite, there shouldn't be any news for everyone, so this is the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz. You are probably tired of seeing this on my channel, but I am still gonna talk about it. Is this getting a bit old? Yes. But, and in terms of shimmers, I do think, for example, the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette that probably has even more sparklier shimmers than this one, but I would still say that in terms of different kind of, because I think this is a palette where, for example, Huda got the experimenting with different formulas right, because Huda especially likes to experiment with textures, and with this palette, she actually did get it right. With some of the palettes that have come after this one, maybe not all of them, but with this one, the different textures they bring something extra to this. They make this more, make this very interesting. It's a very more pinkish palette, but because it has the sort of different kind of textures, it is kind of very an exciting palette, especially for the sort of traditional Sephora sold high-end palettes that you see on Sephora usually. And the color story, because it's just this mauvish purple color story, it's obviously something very me, and yeah, I'm going to be crying in the day when I have to declutter this, because at some point I know this is gonna get old, but so far I have tried this during this year, it is still good to go, it's very beautiful. Even though some could say that, yeah, we have now gotten much more better formulas after this one, but I do think, especially since I have tried now I did try the Icy Nudes palette, which was the big palette that I released last year, and I think the formulas in this one were still much better than the formulas, for example, that were in the Icy Nude palette. But that was the actually last palette that we have discussed in this video. So that was my sort of top 3 palettes in every category. Comment down below what did you think about my choices, and certainly maybe tell on the comments what would be your few choices in some of the categories. And as I said, if you want to do this sort of on your own YouTube channel, I will put the categories in my description box, and you can of course edit them if you feel like. I was actually considering that I might have added a category of like top tier indie palettes, but then I thought that since we had so many like indie palettes in different categories, I decided that I wasn't gonna add it. But that may be a suggestion, that if you do it on your own and want to do some editing with the categories, that's maybe something you could do. If you like this video, push the like button, subscribe to this channel, and ring the bell button if you want to get notifications of my future content. You can also find me with the same nickname, Makeup Hedgehog, on Instagram. I hope to see you soon in the video. Bye bye!